All right, let's move over to the fourth aspect of this, and this is the perspective of the litigant. And I want to start out by asking Marty Lafferty to tell us about her experience as the managing attorney for the Disability Law and Advocacy Center, and tell us a bit about the center and the type of cases that it hears, and how that relates to access to justice.
Sure, happy to, Matt. I am the legal director at Disability Law and Advocacy Center of Tennessee, and we have an acronym, as so many places do. We are DLAC. We're a private nonprofit agency, and we work to end discrimination against people with disabilities. Since 1983, our agency has been designated by the state as the protection and advocacy system here in Tennessee. And we focus on three primary areas. We focus on freedom from harm, freedom from discrimination, and freedom to participate in the community. Big issues, but we can get them resolved, I think. Early in my legal career, I had an opportunity to represent clients in a significant access to justice issue. I represented 6 clients with mobility disabilities who encountered physical barriers when trying to access court programs in 25 of our counties in Tennessee. The primary barriers were that stairs were the only means of accessing either the courthouse or the courtrooms. And the case is called Lane v. Tennessee. As you can imagine, it's real hard to access justice if you can't get inside the courthouse or if you can't get inside the courtroom where the program is being held. Fortunately, things are a lot better now since we got the settlements in that case. Those happened in 2005, and at this point, we have a lot better accessibility in Tennessee. Most of the 25 counties made physical changes to their courthouses, and that helped a whole lot. The biggest change, though, was at the state level. We actually have a Tennessee Judicial Branch ADA policy, and that policy has helped make sure people with mobility disabilities and people with lots of different kinds of disabilities can have access to our court program. Thanks to the policy and the related procedures, Tennessee is now a model for other states on the issue of disability access in court settings. I'm real pleased that Tennessee's Access to Justice Commission has included disability as one of its focus areas ever since its inception. I think characterizing disability-related barriers as barriers to access to justice really helps everybody, court personnel, people with disabilities, attorneys, and members of the public understand that disability can be a significant barrier to accessing justice. There are plenty of other barriers, being self-represented, having low income, all of those things, but disability is right up there with those things. My organization, DLAC, the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center, and other agencies dealing with disability rights issues provide regular input to the Access to Justice Commission and also to the Tennessee Administrative Office of the Courts. And I think working together, we've gotten a lot of the barriers resolved. There are still some barriers that remain, and in my view, the biggest disability-related barrier that remains at this point is people who are deaf not having access to interpreters in court settings. Tennessee court clerks, ADA coordinators, and even judges sometimes still deny requests for interpreters. And it happens even though the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehab Act very clearly state that people with disabilities have a right to effective communication in court settings. It's really not, well, as a practical matter, it's usually necessary for courts to provide interpreters for folks whose primary language is American Sign Language. And I'm real proud to say that actually in Tennessee, we have a law that is stronger than the ADA on this point. Tennessee law specifically says that courts have to provide sign language interpreters to deaf parties and to witnesses. So it goes beyond just saying effective communication. It says you have to provide interpreters. It seems to me that one of the reasons we're still having this barrier is that a lot of folks who are hearing, whether they're attorneys or judges or ADA coordinators, don't really understand how deaf people communicate. And as part of the Access to Justice Commission's educational goals, Vanderbilt Kennedy Center and DLAC put together, in the last year or so, a short video about common disability barriers. We're going to watch a short excerpt that focuses on why deaf people need to use sign language interpreters to discuss complex legal information. Matt, you got that for us?
How are you? I'm here because I called for an interpreter with a lawyer. I called for when I arrived, there wasn't an interpreter there.
Okay. And it sounds like you asked for the interpreter ahead of time when you called on the phone, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Did the attorney try to communicate with you in any other way during the meeting?
I tried to write notes with me, but that's a problem. So my English isn't perfect, and so sometimes I don't understand a lot of the words, especially when the lawyer uses those legal words. So I really need an interpreter to help me understand. That makes sure that I understand, that I know what's going on.
Okay, and I think you speak American Sign Language, is that right?
That's right.
Can you tell me a little bit about the difference between American Sign Language and English?
In ASL, we don't use every word like in English. It's not a one-to-one ratio of English words to ASL signs. So we miss a lot of language growing up. We need the interpreter to make sure that everything is clear and we understand the lawyer.
Okay, that makes sense to me. So this meeting where the attorney just wrote notes, you weren't able to understand?
Not always. It's really not the best way of communicating with deaf people. It can be very, very frustrating. It wastes time. And really, some of us don't understand the language at all and really can't read.
Okay.
So for us, the notes just don't work.
Okay, and it sounds like that could result in some kind of misunderstanding between you and your attorney, is that right?
That's right.
All right, I hope that video was helpful to you. We put it together to really illustrate the differences between English and American Sign Language. Most deaf folks learned American Sign Language, or ASL, before learning to speak English. And if you remember back to when you first learned to read English and speak English, how did you learn it? You learned it by listening to other people talk, right? So that's one of the reasons it's so difficult for people who are deaf and who can't hear to ever learn English. So their primary language is typically going to be American Sign Language. Because of that, most of these folks have really low reading levels, usually about 6th grade, some of them even more like 3rd grade reading level. And if you imagine going back to maybe learning 3rd grade Spanish or something like that, imagine trying to talk to a court or to another attorney using only your 3rd grade Spanish skills. It probably wouldn't go real well, right? So that's why a lot of our folks have trouble if they go to court and are trying to communicate with written notes. My colleagues at DLEC and I have been fortunate to have a lot of experience communicating with sign language interpreters with our deaf clients. And for those of you who haven't done that yet, and I think it's going to be happening more and more, some things to know. Context is really important when communicating with somebody who's deaf using a sign language interpreter. Quick example, the word run. If I use the word run, I might be meaning that I have a runny nose, or I might be meaning that I'm getting ready to go for a run, or I might be meaning that, oh my goodness, my statute of limitations is running tomorrow. Lots of different contexts. Same thing in sign language. And to complicate it further, in sign language, each of those kinds of run have a slightly different sign that go with them. So it can get kind of complicated. Matt had asked me, do folks who speak sign language have any kind of affect to their language? You know, we do that with gestures and facial expressions and volume. Deaf people also have affect, and they primarily are doing it with the way they're gesturing and with their facial expressions. Facial expressions are real important in sign language. The sign language interpreter tries to match the affect of the person they're interpreting for, so that's something else to keep in mind. Wanted to try to figure out how do we make sure we start addressing this remaining barrier, because Tennessee, like I said, has come a long way with disability-related barriers. I think more training is needed for court clerks and for the local ADA coordinators, for judges and other key players. I also think more training is needed for people with disabilities to know how to make these requests and how to ask for what they need. So we're welcoming the opportunity to continue working with the Access to Justice Commission and also the AOC to try to keep working on this issue. But I think we're getting closer, certainly.
Great.